conversation with myself, Gary. Superstar Olympian that you are, world renowned, in swimming terms, but as also one of America's greatest sort of Olympic athletes as well. So obviously, congratulations on that front.
Sure. Yeah, I was a world-class swimmer. I competed in 3 Olympic Games. I won a total of 10 Olympic medals, 5 gold, 3 silver, 2 bronze. I'm in the Olympic Hall of Fame. I became the first person with type 1 diabetes to compete and medal in the Olympic Games in any sport, and took up the torch of patient advocacy. I've been very involved in that front for a long time, since my diagnosis with type 1 diabetes in March of 1999. And so that those efforts have graduated me up through the ranks of healthcare systems, and I now proudly serve on as vice chairman of the International Board for Sanford Health, which is a large integrated healthcare system here in the United States that spans 26 states.
In terms of, Gary Hall, I'm obviously aware of your dad, his success. But where I want to start is how does Gary Hall sort of take up swimming? Is it just as simple as that's what the family were doing, or was it something that you sort of instigated in terms of from minute one you really just wanted to sort of jump in a pool and start from there?
I've been swimming longer than I can remember.
Okay.
I was taught by my aunt before I could walk, I'm told, and swimming was something that we did as a family. I come from a very large family, lots of aunts and uncles, lots of cousins around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we would travel together to South Florida, the Bahamas. We had homes there, and that was where I learned how to swim. It's where I fell in love with the water. I fell in love with the water before I fell in love with swimming,
mm-hmm.
and the ocean particularly. And so grew up doing that, and then later, much later, I joined a competitive swimming team, but that wasn't until about 13 or 14 years of age.
So you mentioned in terms of just being in love with the water in general, whether it be in the ocean or whether it be, in a swimming pool, which is great to, to hear. So just touch upon that area briefly in terms of where you're at now. Do you still, do you sort of dive, or do you still go out into the ocean now? Do you still have that sort of love for water in general, even though there's
I definitely consider myself a waterman. And the people that I admired in the sport, the most inspiring was Duke Kahanamoku, because he too, was a swimmer in the ocean before, he went into a pool and became an Olympic champion way back. And so, I felt this connection with the water, and I still get in. I do a lot of surfing. I love spearfishing, and a good adventure there, and so those are my water-based activities these days. And through most of my swimming career, from the year 2000 to 2008, I would say that the majority of my training, water time, was done in the ocean, not in a swimming pool. And that's when I was actively competing and one of the world's best swimmers.
So was that actually part of the regime? So it was deliberately sort of mapped out for you to swim in the ocean, but was that just to build up your strength, the current, just the endurance? What element, where did that come from?
Yeah, that's right. What I like about ocean based activity is that it is not the regime. It isn't the monotony of swimming back and forth in a structured set with timed intervals, and everything is so structured in the swimming. And in the ocean, especially in the clear, warm waters of the Atlantic, down in South Florida and the Bahamas, total freedom. It's like another planet down there, but the benefits, yes, you're swimming against currents. I mean, imagine if you're a runner, a marathon runner, and you only run uphill for all the time, and then you get to a competition, it's on level ground. what that would imagine, it would feel like you're running downhill. So if you're used to battling currents of the ocean, then pool water seems
Easy.
Yeah,
I was going to say easy, but obviously, this is not me as an Olympic swimmer doing it. So even a swimming pool's tough for me, Gary. It's interesting because it's the mindset, isn't it? Somebody like yourself and I was looking at your sort of training and how hearing about how you responded more as a competitor. You love the competition from what I've heard in other interviews that he had, really sort of thrived on that moment more than the training element. So I can imagine different types of training to keep your interest to some extent, different challenges, different ways to just sort of approach, sort of getting ready for the element that you love the most. Is that correct?
I came up in a distance program where I was doing 20,000 meters a day through early high school years, and just not doing well in that system. I was surviving it. I was getting through it, as many of the teammates were. But that wasn't the best type of training. And so it was, I always believed that hard work and having fun were not exclusive, right? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to work hard, but I wanted to make it race specific. And because that is, and I knew very early on that that's what I liked about the sport. Yeah. The training, was a badge, right? And a vehicle to get me into a level of fitness that enabled me to be competitive at the highest level of the sport. But it wasn't what the sport was all about for me. The thrill, the rush of stepping up on the blocks and putting it all out on the line, risking everything for a shot at glory was fun. But in swimming, it's it's measured to the 100th of a second.
Yeah.
And so these different approaches, why is it that in a swim team of 100 swimmers, all of them doing the same set, day in, day out, every day, all of them similar type of backgrounds, access to food and all the things that go into sport and the preparation required. Why does one excel at the end of the season and why does one fail? Yeah. And so it's a very interesting area for sports psychologists, for all psychologists, in terms of identifying motivators and demotivators within the human, because of that, it is measured to 100th of a second, and day in and day out, you can see. I mean, even in a set of 550s, if you yell at somebody and scream at them right before you send them off, what type of result, how does that stack up against the one where you're like, you can do this, I believe in you, that type of approach, and see what the result is, right?
It's fascinating because I've spoken with sort of athletes across different sports, and how some Premier League footballers have got to sort of the title winning moment towards the end of the season, and they've said the pressure was unbelievable. And just when I think that, as somebody as an outsider, a spectator, and you look at it and think, wow, they must be loving it. It must be the time of their life. This is everything that you've been wanting to do, from the age of sort of 5 or 6, whenever you picked up a ball, this is culminating in that moment. But then when you hear from them, it's very much a down to earth reality check for some people. Others look at it just the same, but some of them have said that the pressure was just so great on them, they almost lost perspective of life, which sounds really sad. But one of them actually sort of pinpointed that it only took his daughter to be ill for him to actually gain a perspective on reality. To almost find a healthy balance between, okay, this is important, but this isn't everything. And he was able to cope with the pressure again once he sort of recalibrated. Yeah, to some extent.
I think that there was definitely some enlightenment in my own diagnosis with type 1 diabetes, potentially life-threatening disease, chronic condition, it did. I mean, if we're looking at silver linings, there was some perspective out of that, right? That this swimming all of a sudden, you know, it's great, but am I changing the world? Am I really, if I did 21.6, 50 freestyle, is that changing the world? Is it making anybody's life better? It's impressive. It's fun. It's challenging. But, you know, like, you know, so yeah, I think there was probably, you know, some benefit out of the perspective. Because yes, the sport at that elite level, any sport is consuming, absolutely consuming. And so you don't see, you know, you become so hyper-focused on.
And in terms of your, you know, sort of diabetes, what age were you sort of diagnosed with that? What age when you?
I was 24 years old, and that's the autoimmune disease, not the lifestyle related. Type 1 and type 2. Type 2 being kind of an inefficiency of the pancreas and ability to break down the food that we eat into an energy that we can use. And type 1 is an autoimmune disease, so there's no cure for it. It's something that I have to take insulin shots for on a daily, multiple times a day basis, and test my blood sugar, just make adjustments. So a real challenge. And yeah, I've gotten pretty good at it, but anybody that has diabetes knows that even the times that you do everything right, there's still some days where everything goes wrong.
In terms of, you know, when you got sort of that diagnosis, you still carried on swimming, didn't you? Obviously afterwards, you know, from there, how did your training and how did it affect your sort of mentality? You know, because obviously it's a complete bombshell, isn't it? I imagine for yourself, and a lot of people that are either have got that or other illnesses, who are, you know, athletes or who are trying to become an athlete, who've suddenly had that sort of moment where they've had an injury or, you know, a diagnosis where suddenly their world sort of spins on an axle to some extent. How do you, you know, sort of shift gears in terms of trying to put everything in place and also try and, you know, compete on what you were trying to do?
Yeah, well, it was a process, right? There are stages of grief outlined, identified, and I would hit all of those, you know, and I was despondent for a long time. I was told by doctors upon diagnosis that it was the end of my swimming career, that it was impossible to compete at that level because it had never been done before. And so I you know, I hadn't gone to medical school. I couldn't argue with a doctor and tell them, no, you're wrong, I'm going to do this. You know, I appreciate a defiant attitude, you know, you know, and we celebrate this, you know, never say die, and you know, don't take no for an answer, and persevere, and, you know, but, you know, the truth or the reality of that diagnosis was dark. It was a dark place, and it took me quite some time. I mean, relatively in the scheme of things, a short period of time, but I was diagnosed about 1.5 years out from the Olympic Games, and it took me, you know, 6 months before I was able to find the courage to get back in the water. And it took also finding a new, more encouraging doctor that, you know, was willing to work with me and try to figure something out. But what we did through that learning process, and everything had to change, everything. I was not able to train the same way that I was training before. And was fortunate to be working with a coach and a doctor that was willing to kind of figure this out on the fly. And, you know, we changed what is being taught in medical school today, in the way that we were managing and the changes that we were making to managing chronic condition and sport and physical activity.
It's fascinating because I remember, and it's completely different, but obviously within your sport. Was it Kieran Perkins with his asthma? Is that right? I may be showing my age a little bit on that one, but I vaguely remember, you know, him suffering really bad asthma and really brought asthma to sort of, you know, to the sporting world to some extent. I think most people, if they said sports person and asthma, probably 9 out of 10 people would probably say Kieran Perkins, on that one. In terms of, sort of going back to the beginning though, Gary, because like you say, you love the water. So how did you go from sort of a young kid just having family vacations, enjoying the water, just having a good time, to then really go from there to into sort of high school, sort of collegiate sort of competitions? When did it sort of take that step up from just fun to this could be something?
Well, I was fortunate. I was growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I started a year-round swimming program right before going into high school. And my high school team, they haven't lost the state title in something like 40 some years or something like that. Like it was this great
no pressure.
Like for high school swimming, it's not super competitive. It's competitive, but it was, and it was maybe also the era where it was much more of a work hard, play hard type of approach. And so it was cool to be thrown into a team that these guys were real badass athletes, right? But they were also high school kids having fun.
Yeah.
And so that combination of being, I really embraced it, and I maintained my club swimming alongside, that high school. But I loved that it was still, we were taking ourselves seriously, putting in work, but also horsing around.
and those enjoying life.
Yeah, and those are some of my best memories in the sport. Even from the elite, competing in the Olympics and stuff like that. I look back and those memories. But it was competitive, and we'd be go from parties the night before to the swim meet the next morning, bright and early, and still be able to step up on the blocks and really throw it out. So
you still do that now, Gary?
The parties are throwing down.
Or both. One or the other, or both at the same time would be very impressive.
Old habits.
Well, so in terms of, as you're coming through and you're having a good time, you're still living life, where does it take that sort of leap up? I mean, I'm conscious I've asked all sort of, people in their professions, when do you start looking at it as a career? Where does it go from a hobby, just fun, to then suddenly, okay, this could actually be, a tangible career and everything that comes after that? But where does that mindset shift, and what sort of age range was that for you?
Late high school. There were some things. My grandfather was imprisoned in the largest case against an individual in U.S. history. Wow. From 6th grade to high school, I had the FBI following me to school and my siblings and everything.
Wow.
So it was a traumatic experience. And early days, swimming was a great and healthy outlet for some of the processing some of the stuff attached with that. And there's typical already, teenage angst, like teenagers, right, have some explosive nature to them. Multiply that by a billion. I had a dark energy, and and I knew that after a couple of arrests and in early years in high school, and some of my friends had died, and by the time I was a junior and senior, that if it wasn't swimming or sport, that was my ticket out, right? Like that I was heading down, maybe jail, maybe something else, I don't know, but that it was swimming was my ticket out. And so what became a healthy outlet, right, just kind of raging against water and something else, it did ultimately become that. But part of that, I think, looking back when we were talking earlier about silver linings and making lemonade out of lemons, that energy, right, that frustration, Ultimately, it was such a fire, right, that pushed me harder, that gave me enough, and that's what it takes. I mean, especially in sprints, it's very violent, it's very explosive, and I don't endorse, street fighting and stuff like that. But I mean, coming from that background and just knowing how to focus rage, right? Like, and it was sloppy at first, but better and better through time and practice, I was able to direct that dark energy into a positive direction. It was really an advantage over other guys that had a very well-adjusted, happy existence, by the end of high school, I was really turning into a good swimmer. And
it's fascinating to hear, Gary, because some people search for the edge, and for you almost have that raw, like you said, that raw sort of anger, as it were, raw energy, raw, sort of motivation that you can't give it to somebody. You just had it, and it's not a gift, because obviously you've had to go through a lot of sort of trauma, really, to put it that way. And I suppose the best way you can put it is, a lot of people that have been through unbelievable trauma become the most inspiring people around, because hey, if you can come through that situation and end up there, people that have gone through situations nothing even near that level, then suddenly go, oh, well, if they can get through that, I can get through this. But also, if somebody's competing against yourself, how much, I mean, obviously, like you said, because you've lived, obviously your family in the public eye almost all your life to some extent, haven't you, really, from, like you say, from your family into the FBI, in terms of obviously your dad and competing. How much pressure is on yourself, though, Gary? Because obviously it's an unbelievable amount of pressure, isn't it? Carrying sort of the name that you do carry into the sport, on top of almost every single light bulb and eye on yourself, before you can even really establish yourself as just you. That makes sense. Before you can even just sort of get yourself in the pool and start swimming fast. A lot of people can cruise in, get themselves established before nobody even knows who they even are, where you're going straight in at the deep end, aren't you, really? Expectations to the moon, and whatever, if you don't achieve what other people's expectations are of you, then you failed, even though you've only just got started.
That definitely was the case. I mean, the pressure, the expectations were tremendous, really. Before I even signed up for the swim team, my father was World Swimmer of the Year twice. He held 10 world records, a legend in the sport in terms of his work ethic, and he knew everybody. I mean, he was the only swimmer to carry the flag for the United States of America at the Olympic Games, up until Michael Phelps came along and had that honor. So, I mean, not bad company for, but these were the shoes I had to fill. And we have the same name, so comparisons were going to be made. And that's all. It was a lot of pressure, a lot.
Do you remember the races over the records, or do you, because obviously you're doing the training, so is it, you against the clock, or do you prefer that, sort of sit back and go, yeah, that moment was amazing, sort of winning that race?
Yeah, I never cared about the times. Never cared about. It was just the race, right? That competition that you're referring to, and there were certain individuals in the sport that pushed me harder than I would have pushed myself. Real rivalries.
In terms of where you're at, sort of since swimming, though, Gary, where have you been sort of post swimming? What's sort of Gary Hall's journey, after all the success of the Olympics? What's life been like, for yourself? And what's that transition? Because I know a lot of athletes really do struggle, because you're used to the training, you're used to the mindset, you're used to the routine, diets, everything. it's a completely different world, for themselves. How's it been for yourselves, making that transition?
Yeah, so talking silver linings again, one of the benefits out of the diabetes diagnosis was that it created a path of advocacy and a career path parallel to my swimming career. So I was immersed in this diabetes work long before I hung up the swimsuit. And so that made the transition for me so much easier. One, in that there was income that I could rely on that would continue on after swimming income dried up. But more than that, in my identity, because that's where psychologically a lot of the athletes struggle. If you spend 20 plus years identifying as a swimmer, mm-hmm. and then you're not a swimmer anymore, well, who am I? What is life? What is like the questions start coming up. And a lot of people, it's not an easy answer to, and it's not an easy thing to do, to reinvent yourself and start again at the bottom. I mean, this is very difficult, right? When you become accustomed to a certain level of success and results, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into an office cubicle, and you've got a middle manager breathing down your neck on how many calls you've made in a day, and because the reality of professional sports, okay, soccer players, there's enough padding, they're making enough money along the way that they've got some savings. That's not the case with swimmers, and maybe it is in England for some, but that was not the case. It's not the case today for swimmers in the United States, that they've got that padding to make the transition a little bit smoother, to buy 2-3 years to try to figure things out. And so, a lot of people really, really struggle with that. I have friends and teammates from through the years that I've seen struggle horribly.
So in terms of, your rivalry, would you say Popov is your main rival over the years?
Yeah, that was, in terms of who I hated most, yeah.
No Christmas cards to each other then, Gary?
No, and that hate was mutual.
and in terms of, I don't know, feel free not to say, in terms of when you sit down with obviously your dad, in terms of both phenomenally successful, both of you, do you ever sit back and discuss sort of races or compare races that you've both sort of done, or ever sort of look back on, a race from an analytical perspective? Do you ever sit and go, a race that you've won or a race that you've lost that you felt that you could have won? Or
I don't want to dismiss that entirely, because I do remember discussing immediately after races what I could have done better, right? It takes that analytical approach to improve. But beyond that, now the Olympic races are different. You see a post on social media or something like that, or an introductory video for public speaking, where there's a clip of a race from the Olympics. But that's the only one that I've ever gone back and watched after it was done. And so,
and in terms of that,
there's no glory days kind of thing where I'm like, old race videos, let me get that meet out from 1999, that was a time.
So in terms of obviously where you're at now, Gary, is there anything that, you really want to sort of bring awareness to, for the audience that are obviously watching this, in terms of the projects that you're working on, anything that's coming up, for yourself, for them to keep, sort of an eye on, and I'll obviously put the links out there for yourself, as well, for them to look at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm involved with a couple of companies that are interesting, that I, really like. One is a diabetes company. Dexcom is the name of it, and they make a continuous glucose monitoring device. So before I would have to stab my finger, bleed, and then test my blood to see if my blood sugar was high or low, and make adjustments with insulin or carbohydrate intake. to kind of counterbalance. But this CGM, or continuous glucose monitoring device, is a little wearable device that gives you trends up or down. So I'm able to avoid like the high blood sugars and the low blood sugars much better with this device. So that was a big breakthrough in terms of diabetes management technology. So really like that, part of the Dexcom Warriors program, just ambassadors and patient advocates. The other one, MitoQ, is an antioxidant, and as a competing athlete, I use CoQ10, which is an antioxidant that's been around forever, and this is something like 800 times more powerful. Tons and tons of research, which I'm big on. I'm in the healthcare system. I sit as vice chairman of the International Board for Sanford Health. I mentioned that, an incredible organization, but huge arm in medical research. And so being part of that organization and being immersed in diabetes research for so long, I know how important these clinical trials are, white papers, the studies to prove efficacy, because especially in a nutritional supplement world, so many claims that are just totally unfounded, right? We've all heard those before. So those are the big ones. The other one that I'm really proud to serve on is the leadership board for the National Youth Sport Health and Safety Institute. And my involvement there is kind of contributing, co-authoring best practice recommendations and for all levels of sport in the United States through the American College of Sports Medicine. Our reach is to try to educate volunteer age group coaches on what to do in the event of an asthma attack or a low blood sugar, for a young soccer player on the field, how to treat that. These are parents that care, oftentimes, that volunteer for these roles and don't know the first thing about what to do in these situations. So important work on that front, and something that I'm very proud of. So those are the ones how I occupy my time. I'm on Instagram. You can find me at GaryHall.jr, but I'm not big on there.
Well, I'm not even gonna mention anything to do with a guitar apart from just now. That's it. Won't go down that route for you. I know you're sick and tired of it, so I'm not going to talk about it, on that front. So just lastly, obviously the Olympics is, well, I think it is, as we speak, it's still on. So who knows what will happen in a month's time at this rate. But do you still follow swimming, sort of day? I know you've been at the trials, haven't you? Were you doing commentary or just sort of watching, or?
I was there as a fan. I brought my kids, they're 13 and 15 years old and just getting into the sport of swimming. And I just went to watch fast swimming. I'm still a fan of the sport. And it was fun to watch Caleb Dressel swim at 21.04. Tokyo, I'm going to be glued to the TV watching and cheering. And it's a great sport. I love it.
Is there any, obviously we're over the pond, to put it that way. Is there anybody that we may not have heard of? Because obviously we don't see the Olympic trials to some extent from the US over here. So is there anybody that we may not have heard of from, like 4 years ago, or somebody who's really sort of new and up and coming for us to sort of keep a bit of an eye out, from a US perspective?
Yeah, so Caleb Dressel is the next guy.
Okay.
Yeah, just a lights out swimmer. A tough competitor. He's the real deal. You'll know his name after Tokyo Olympics.
It's gonna be on the back of cereal boxes afterwards. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do they still do that these days? I don't know.
Yeah. I guess people still eat cereal.
So anyone on the sort of the female side? Anyone sort of coming through on that side?
Well, Katie Ledecky is still. Yeah, Katie Ledecky is. Just a very special woman, in terms of how good she is, how tough she is mentally. She's going to be a contender. She's coming home with medals. I can guarantee that.
So in the Olympics, sort of further down the line, are we going to see one of your kids potentially there, Gary?
I'm not going to put that kind of pressure on them. I want them to be happy and
what will be.
I'll take that over Nettles.
Absolutely. And lastly, any tips for, sort of kids that may watch this, in terms of, as they're just venturing into swimming and, finding their way, and any tips for them, sort of as they're just sort of starting out in that journey, really?
Yeah. The advice I got from my father was have fun. That's good advice. It's the athlete that's having fun that wins, not the athlete that wins that is having fun. And so I'm a firm believer in that. And again, hard work and having fun are not exclusive. You can combine the two. But the other thing is be patient. Play the long game, and know that setbacks are only failures if you fail to learn from them. And that the setbacks are what make the champion. It's easy to be, gracious, when everything goes your way, when you win, but champions determined about how they deal with that adversity. And that's what we're reminded of. That's why the Olympic Games resonates so much with all of us, is because every single sport, every single event has somebody in there that overcame something that just would have put others down, right? And every walk of life, every type of adversity, is out there, and it's inspiring. It's inspiring to all of us, and so know that you're going to get kicked along the way, right? That life is going to throw a punch or two, and you're going to get hit hard. And everybody. Mike Tyson said, "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face," and it's just a matter of time before life punches you in the face. Stick with the plan. Don't give up. Don't get discouraged.
Well, I'm going to leave you in peace, Gary. Otherwise, I'm going to keep you to Christmas. If I carry on talking on that front, Gary. But I wanted to have a true conversation with yourself. That wasn't an interview. That was more about your journey, and not just about the same elements that everybody always talks, on. But to know you as a person, and all those different elements. So hopefully it'll provide value, for people watching, on that side.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Fantastic. Well, enjoy your sunny weather, Gary. But over there is an absolute torrential rainstorm. So you're gonna have a great day, and I'm gonna get the umbrella up.
Yeah, get your swimming suit on too.
Nobody wants to see me in the pool, Gary.
Well, with that much rain coming, you don't even have to get in the pool.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Gary. Speak to you soon.
Take care.